Welcome to Wisdom for the Present, where we take ancient truth and bring it into clear, modern understanding. This episode uses AI-generated narration based on human-researched and written material.
Yeah, and today's deep dive is a pretty wild one, honestly.
It really is. So I want you, the listener, to just imagine for a second that your life's greatest failure was just broadcast to the world, like completely public.
Oh, man. Yeah, the absolute worst nightmare.
Right. You are just completely stripped of your status. Your peers are, whispering about you. Your bank account is draining, and your whole sense of identity is just entirely shattered.
It's that feeling of total free fall.
Exactly. So the question is, how long would it take you to recover? I mean, a month, a decade, or would you ever really recover at all?
Most people don't, to be honest.
Yeah, they just get stuck. But today, we are looking at this ancient, literally shattered manuscript that claims to have the exact psychological formula for surviving that precise moment of total devastation.
Yeah, and we need to clarify what we mean by a shattered manuscript, because we are looking at a literary landscape today that is completely fragmented.
Like beyond fragmented.
Right. We are exploring this highly specific section of the Panchatantra, specifically Book 3, Section 3. But for you listening right now, you really need to understand that we are not looking at some complete, pristine manuscript today.
No, not at all.
We don't have the luxury of, whole paragraphs or even complete sentences. We are operating quite literally on the extreme edge of a torn page.
I have to admit, when I first saw the source material for this deep dive, I was incredibly skeptical.
I don't blame you. It looks like a mistake.
It really does. Because usually when we analyze ancient wisdom on this show, we expect a complete thought, right? Like thesis, some supporting arguments, a neat little conclusion.
Yeah, a nice, clean philosophical package.
Right. But what we have here are surviving textual fragments. I mean, these are literal pieces of words cut off on the extreme edge of a page from an ancient scanned source.
Just a handful of syllables.
Exactly, just syllables that somehow managed to survive the ravages of time and, aggressive cropping and just general document degradation.
It's honestly a miracle we even have these.
So true. I'm actually going to read the entirety of our surviving source material just to set the stage, because this is literally all we have to work with. Ready?
Let's hear it.
Okay, here's the list. First line, posal, he. Next line, degraded. Next, words, I. Next, personal. Then, and dus, which historians infer is dust.
Right.
Then, and star, which is stars. Then, there meaning therefore. Next line is just and. Then, and pre, which could be pride or maybe proceed. Next line, proceed, which is clearly proceed. And finally, his D, which scholars think is his duty, or maybe his doom.
Yeah, it's quite the list.
When you hear them isolated like that, I mean, they sound almost like a distress signal, like a telegram from antiquity.
A very broken telegram.
Right. So my initial thought was, how can we possibly extract a complete roadmap for navigating failure from 11 broken fragments? I mean, doesn't the human brain just want to see patterns in the static?
100%. Pareidolia.
Hey.
Right, finding shapes in the clouds.
Exactly. We might just be projecting an entire philosophy onto what is essentially ancient confetti.
It is a totally fair suspicion.
Yeah.
But to understand why these specific fragments carry such massive weight, we have to ground ourselves in what the Panchatantra actually is.
Right. The context changes everything.
It does.
Yeah.
So this is an ancient Indian collection of interrelated animal fables. It's written in Sanskrit verse and prose, and it's widely considered one of the most influential texts in world literature.
But it's not just cute bedtime stories.
Right. Definitely not. At its core, it is a text about niti, N-I-T-I, which roughly translates to, wise conduct, or political science, or just the practical wisdom of navigating a highly complex, often deceitful world.
Right, because the world is messy.
Extremely messy. And the legend behind it is great. The story goes that a wise scholar composed it specifically to teach 3 exceptionally foolish princes how to rule a kingdom.
I love that. 3 foolish princes.
Right. But more importantly, it was to teach them how to rule their own impulsive minds.
Ah, so it is meant to be a ruthlessly pragmatic instruction manual for living effectively.
Exactly. It's not about achieving some, ethereal enlightenment up in the clouds. It's about not getting eaten alive by your enemies or by your own bad decisions.
Which is very relatable today, honestly.
Very. And because the original text was so incredibly dense with structural, psychological truth, even its fragments retain the DNA of the whole.
Okay, wait, explain that. How does a fragment hold the whole truth?
Think of it like a hologram. If you take a holographic plate and you smash it on the ground, Every single tiny shard still contains the entire three-dimensional image.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's a fascinating property of holograms. And these 11 fragments, because they occur in this exact sequence, they mirror the universal human cycle.
The cycle of failure.
Right. Attempting something, failing publicly, spiraling into ego, and eventually clawing our way back to reality. It's like the universe, or just the passage of history, edited out all the fluff and left us with the absolute bedrock mechanics of a psychological collapse and recovery.
Okay, that is a big claim. Let's test that theory. We're going to start with the first 3 fragments, which map out what we are calling the anatomy of a fall.
The anatomy of the fall, yeah.
Because every journey of wisdom starts with the disruption of the status quo, right?
Yeah.
So the text gives us the sequence of posal, he, which is immediately followed by the incredibly heavy words degraded and personal.
Yeah, those are heavy words. So let's begin with posal. In English, this suffix immediately brings to mind proposal.
Like pitching an idea.
Exactly. An offering, an idea put forward, a vulnerability. You are pitching yourself, your idea, your affection, your labor, or, conversely, it brings to mind disposal.
Oh, like being thrown away.
Right, being deemed no longer useful to the system. But either way, posal, he implies a social transaction.
There's an interaction happening.
Yes, an interaction with another person, the he in the text, who holds some kind of power or judgment over the situation.
Okay, so you put something out there, you made a proposal, and the result, the very next line down the torn page, degraded.
Degraded. Let's really linger on the mechanics of that word because it's crucial. Degraded comes from the Latin de, meaning down, and gradus, meaning step.
Down a step.
Quite literally, yes. To be degraded is to be forced down a step in the hierarchy. It is the agonizing experience of losing status, of failing, of being humbled in the eyes of others.
Okay, but wait, I want to push back on this a little bit. I want to challenge how much weight we are giving this concept of status.
Sure. Go ahead.
Because if I make a proposal at work, say, I pitch a new marketing strategy and my boss rejects it, I might be annoyed, obviously. But degraded feels so absolute. It feels overly dramatic, you know?
It does sound dramatic to our modern ears.
Right. Like, why does an ancient text and why do we today treat a simple rejection as a catastrophic drop in our human grade? Shouldn't a mature adult just be able to say, well, bad pitch and move on?
I mean, a completely rational, robotic adult might do that.
It's true.
But human beings are not rational. We are biological and deeply social creatures. You have to look at the neurology and evolutionary biology behind social rejection.
Okay, take me there. What does the biology say?
Well, for our ancient ancestors, being pushed down a step in the tribal hierarchy, being degraded, wasn't just a blow to the ego, it was a physical threat.
Because you needed the tribe to survive.
Exactly.
Okay.
If you fell far enough down the social ladder, you were cast out of the tribe. You lost access to food, shelter, protection. You died.
Wow. So our brains literally evolved to treat a drop in status as a matter of literal survival.
Yes, and this is proven by modern science. When they put people in functional MRI scanners and observe the brain of someone experiencing social rejection or a loss of status, the areas of the brain that light up are the exact same areas that process physical somatic pain.
Wait, really? Like actual physical pain?
Like breaking a leg. The brain processes a rejected proposal the same way it processes physical trauma. So when your pitch is rejected, your brain doesn't say, oh, a minor professional setback.
It sounds the alarm.
It sounds the evolutionary alarm. It screams, we are being cast out. We are going to die in the wilderness.
That is wild, but it makes so much sense. It explains that visceral, sickening feeling in your stomach when you are publicly criticized, right?
The blood rushing to your face.
Yes. The heart palpitations. You are having a biological survival response to a standard boardroom meeting.
Exactly. And that makes the modern context so much worse, honestly.
How so?
Because we're existing in a hyper-quantified society where our grade is constantly on display. Think about it.
Oh, I see where you're going with this. Social media.
Social media, but also we define ourselves by our job titles, the analytics on our latest posts, our financial metrics. We are measuring our status on a minute-by-minute basis.
Right. We're constantly checking our grade.
Which means we are exposing ourselves to microdegradations constantly. If you are your grade and your grade drops, you feel like your actual self is being annihilated.
That is a terrifying way to live.
It is. And this leads us directly into the third fragment in this sequence, which captures the immediate human reflex to this drop in status. The fragment is personal.
Ah, personal. So when we are degraded, our immediate involuntary reaction is to take it deeply, intimately personal.
Right. And taking a setback personal is the primary obstacle to growth. It is actually a deeply insidious psychological defense mechanism.
Okay, hold on. How is taking it personal a defense mechanism? Usually when someone takes things personal, they are in absolute agony.
They are.
They're crying, they're angry, they feel worthless. That doesn't look like a defense to me. It looks like a total collapse.
It looks like a collapse on the outside, but internally it is the ego building a fortress.
A fortress.
Yeah. Think about it. When you take a failure personal, you fuse your entire identity with the temporary event of the failure. You do not say, my marketing pitch lacked sufficient data.
Right. You say, I am a failure.
You say, my boss hates me, I am an imposter, and I am a fundamental failure as a human being. By making it a referendum on your inherent worth, or by framing it as a personal vendetta by the he in the text.
You excuse yourself from the work.
Exactly. You ironically excuse yourself from doing the hard, objective work of analyzing the actual mechanics of the failure.
Wow.
Right.
Let me make sure I'm grasping this because this is huge. If I admit that my pitch was just technically flawed, I have to go back to my desk, open up the spreadsheet, and do 20 hours of grueling research to fix it.
Which takes effort.
A lot of effort. I have to admit my own lack of skill.
Yeah.
But if I take it personal, if I decide my boss is just a tyrant who has it out for me, or I decide the universe is just against me, I get to bypass the hard work.
You get to sit in the break room and play the victim.
No, that is so true. I get to complain to my coworkers instead of fixing the spreadsheet.
Because victimhood is highly efficient. It requires no adaptation.
Man, that hits close to home.
And remember, the Panchatantra, in its full context, is entirely about adapting to shifting circumstances.
Yeah.
The foolish princes in the framing story, they fail because they cannot adapt.
Because they're trapped by their egos.
They are trapped by their own egos and assumptions. When you take a degradation personally, you lose all your strategic vision. You become entirely reactive. You become obsessed with the he who you feel degraded you.
You just give away all your power. The he becomes the center of your universe, and you are just like a supporting character in a tragedy written by someone else. You're just stuck on that lower step, fuming, letting the pain justify your paralysis.
That is the exact state of psychological paralysis the text identifies. The anatomy of a fall is complete right there. You made a proposal, you were degraded down a step, and you built a wall of personal victimhood to hide behind.
That is incredibly bleak, but also incredibly accurate.
Very accurate.
But so how do we break out of that trap? Because if we are biologically wired to feel that pain and psychologically wired to hide behind the ego, how do we stop drowning in the personal?
Well, the text doesn't leave us hanging.
Thank goodness. That brings us to section 2 of our deep dive, the reclaiming of agency. Because once you hit that low, degraded state, the ancient text points us directly to the mechanism of our own escape. The very next fragment isolates the phrase, words, comma, I.
Right, words, I. This is a brilliant linguistic and psychological pivot.
I pivot from what?
We move from things happening to you being at someone's disposal, being degraded by external forces, to the active, declarative first person, I. And the tool of that I is words.
I have to be honest here. When I read words, comma, I, my modern, cynical brain immediately flashes to the self-help aisle.
Oh, I know exactly what you're going to say.
It sounds a lot like toxic positivity, doesn't it?
You really can, yeah.
It sounds like the advice where you stand in front of a mirror after a massive failure and just chant, I am a winner, I am wealthy, I am invincible, just manifesting reality by saying the right words. Please tell me the ancient wisdom isn't just recommending empty affirmations.
It is absolutely not recommending empty affirmations.
Yeah.
And your skepticism is exactly why we need to practice discernment with these ancient texts. The difference between toxic positivity and true agency is the relationship to reality.
Okay, unpack that for me, relationship to reality.
Toxic positivity uses words, comma, I to build a thicker wall of delusion.
A thicker wall.
Yeah. If you were fired because you genuinely neglected your duties, standing in a mirror saying, I am a flawless genius and they were intimidated by my brilliance, that is not reclaiming agency.
No, it's just lying to yourself.
It is deepening the personal trap.
Yeah.
True agency, the real wisdom of this fragment, is about taking ownership of the narrative through objective, descriptive language. It is the shift from being a passive object to an active subject.
So if taking it personal is saying, look what they did to me, what does the healthy version of words, comma, I actually sound like? Give me an example.
It sounds like an architect looking at a collapsed building. You step back into the driver's seat of your own consciousness. You use your words to frame reality accurately, placing the I at the center of the responsibility, not at the center of the victimhood.
I like that. The center of responsibility. Let's look at how this plays out in a crisis today. I'm thinking of like a leader.
Like a CEO.
Yeah, a CEO or a public figure who experiences a massive public failure. Say a product launch completely implodes. The entire industry sees them fall down that step we talked about.
Right, highly degraded.
The press conference the next day is the ultimate test of words, I, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It's the perfect arena.
Because I can picture this perfectly. You usually see two distinct ways this plays out. One CEO gets to the microphone and says, the market conditions were unfair. Our competitors used unethical tactics. The media is spinning this out of proportion.
And what are they doing there? They are using words, but they are words of deflection. They are still entirely controlled by the degradation. They are letting the external circumstances write their story.
But then the other CEO steps up and says something completely different. They say, I made a critical error in judgment. I misread the market data. We rushed the manufacturing process. And that decision rests with me. Here is exactly how I am going to restructure our timeline to fix it.
Yes. That is words, I.
And the irony is, by accepting the degradation so bluntly, by naming the failure with their own words, they instantly reclaim their status. Like the free fall just stops immediately.
That is the mechanical power of language. And it's not just metaphorical, it's neurological.
Really? Back to the brain.
Back to the brain. Neurologically, when you use active first-person language to describe a trauma or a failure, you actually shift brain activity away from the amygdala.
The amygdala is the fear center.
Right, the fear and emotional center.
Yeah.
It shifts away from the amygdala and into the prefrontal cortex, which handles logic, planning, and executive function.
Oh, wow. So just by changing how you speak about it, you change where your brain processes it.
Exactly. By saying I made an error, you are physically rewiring your brain's response to the event. You are no longer the prey being hunted by the failure. You are the researcher studying the failure.
That is such a powerful image. The researcher studying the failure.
The words you choose are the scaffolding you use to climb back up the step you just fell down.
That is fascinating. So the words aren't a magic spell to make the failure disappear, right? They are the literal tools to turn the failure into a data set. You are shifting from I am a failure to I experienced a failure and here is what I will do next.
Precisely. But there's a catch.
There's always a catch. What is it?
This right, which is why the ancient text doesn't stop with internal narrative control. It knows you will burn out if you only look inward. It gives us a technique to achieve the vast perspective required to maintain that agency.
And that takes us right into section 3 of our analysis, the ultimate grounding. Because to escape the trap of endless internal monologue, even a healthy, responsible one, the text forces a massive, violent shift in perspective. It moves us from the deeply internal I to the vastly external, the cosmic.
Cosmic shift, yes.
The text gives us just two partial words next, separated by a conjunction. It says, and dust, which historians reconstruct as dust, and star, which is stars, dust and stars.
This juxtaposition is perhaps the most profound moment in our surviving fragments, honestly.
It really stands out.
We find these two concepts sitting right next to each other, the torn edge of a page.
Yeah?
This is the classic duality of the human condition, perfectly distilled into two nouns.
Okay, let's break down the mechanics of this duality. Why dust?
Well, think about what dust represents across almost all ancient wisdom traditions, from Genesis in the Bible to ancient Indian philosophy.
Ash to ash, dust to dust.
Exactly. Dust represents mortality. It is the earth, the dirt. It is our physical limitations, our messiness, the grit of daily life. Ultimately, it represents our fundamental, unavoidable humility.
Because when you are degraded, when you fail, you are cast down into the dust.
Yes, you are reminded that you are not a god, you are fragile matter, you are just dust.
But then, right next to it, in the exact same breath, we have the stars.
The stars represent the exact opposite. They are the heavens. They are the cosmic, the infinite, the overarching perspective. They represent objective reality and the grand, unfathomable timeline of the universe that makes our current burning problems look microscopic.
Right. We are made of dust, yet we are uniquely capable of perceiving the stars. We are basically the bridge between the dirt and the infinite.
That's a beautiful way to say it.
It's a beautiful thought, but okay, I have to challenge this.
Go for it.
Because I want to make sure this is actually useful for the listener and not just, a beautiful poem.
Right, practical application.
Exactly. If I am in the dust, if my business just went bankrupt or I just went through a devastating divorce, my vision is completely obscured by my own misery. I am literally weeping into the dirt.
It's hard to see anything else.
Doesn't the mountaintop of success actually give you a better view of the stars? Why is the text implying that we look at the stars from the dust? Why is the dust a requirement for this perspective?
It is a brilliant question. The mountaintop of success seems like the logical place to look at the sky, right? You're closer to it.
Yeah, that's what you'd think.
But think about what actually happens to the human psyche when you are on that mountaintop. When your proposal is accepted, when you are wealthy, successful, and praised, you rarely look up.
You look down.
You look down. You look down at everyone else, or you look at a mirror to admire yourself. Success inflates the ego, and an inflated ego blocks the sky. Your view is completely obscured by your own self-importance.
Oh man, you begin to believe that you actually are the center of the universe.
Exactly. So success actually creates a false, limited horizon.
That makes so much sense. I've seen that in so many leaders.
But when you are knocked down into the dust, when the ego is violently shattered by failure, the artificial ceiling you built over yourself is destroyed. The sky opens up. Humiliation clears the lens.
Humiliation clears the lens. I love that.
And this is deeply aligned with Stoic philosophy, by the way. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor, he used this exact technique. He called it the view from above.
The view from above, how did he use it?
Well, while he was out on the freezing frontiers dealing with plagues, betrayals, and just the immense crushing burden of ruling an empire, he would actively visualize himself zooming out.
Zooming out how?
Like a camera pulling back from his tent to the battlefield, to the whole continent, to the earth spinning in the void, and finally to the vastness of the cosmos.
Wow. But wait, doesn't that just lead to nihilism?
Nihilism. Okay. How so?
If you zoom out far enough, your bankruptcy, your divorce, your ruined reputation, they mean absolutely nothing. In fact, you mean nothing. Does looking at the stars just trick you into apathy? Like, why bother trying to fix my life if the universe is so huge?
It is a really critical distinction between nihilism and existential relief. They look similar, but they operate differently.
Explain the difference.
Nihilism says, nothing matters, therefore I should just give up. Existential relief says, my current suffering is not the center of the universe, therefore I can survive it.
Oh, therefore I can survive it.
Yes. When you are in the dust of a fresh failure, the cognitive load is crushing because your brain is telling you this is the most important catastrophe in the history of the world.
Right. It feels all-consuming.
But looking at the stars regulates the nervous system. It forces the brain to contextualize the suffering. It shrinks the monster down to a manageable size.
So it's not about ignoring the problem. It's about right-sizing the problem so you have the emotional bandwidth to actually deal with it.
Exactly right.
It reminds me of stepping out of a noisy, crowded, highly stressful party.
Yeah, great analogy.
Like, you're overwhelmed, so you walk out onto the back porch into the cool night air for 5 minutes. You look up at the sky. The party is still happening inside. The stress, the arguments, the mess, it's all still there.
It didn't go away.
No, it's waiting for you. But the night sky re-regulates your nervous system so you can go back inside and handle the chaos without screaming.
Yes, and just like that cold air on the back porch, the stars provide a sudden shock of physical and temporal reality. But notice the grammar of the fragment here.
What about the grammar?
It is not dust or stars. It is and dust and star. You must hold both simultaneously.
Oh, that conjunction is doing a lot of work.
It is the most important word there, because if you only look at the dust, you despair. You drown in your own inadequacy. But if you only look at the stars, you become detached, ungrounded, and you trip over the very real, practical problems right in front of you. You cannot live on the back porch forever.
Which brings us perfectly to the final crucial movement of our fragmented text. Because the back porch is regulating, but eventually you have to go back inside.
You have to re-enter the party.
Cosmic perspective is beautiful, but it cannot be a place to hide from reality. The ancient author knew that you can't just philosophize your way out of a crisis.
No, you cannot.
The final fragments demand that we bring this newfound perspective back down to earth through concrete, undeniable action. And this is section 4. The imperative of action.
Right. We move away from the philosophical and into the fiercely practical mechanics of survival.
So the text concludes with these final torn words. Let's look at them, which is therefore. And pre-historians debate this one. Perhaps pride, but more likely prepare or proceed. Proceed, which is definitely proceed. And finally, his duty or his dharma.
Let's really isolate that pivot point.
Yeah.
Therefore, it is a mathematical word A logical hinge.
A hinge, meaning it connects everything before it to what comes next.
Exactly, because we have faced a proposal that led to a painful degradation.
Right.
Because we have fought the biological urge to build a wall of personal victimhood.
Yeah.
Because we have actively reclaimed our narrative with words, I.
And shifted out of the amygdala.
Yes. And because we have found our regulated place between the mortality of the dust and the infinity of the stars, therefore
what? I mean, you have all this massive insight, you have processed the trauma, you have zoomed out to the cosmos. So what do you do on a Tuesday morning? Because philosophy without action is just intellectual entertainment.
And the text does not leave us with entertainment. It gives us a command. Proceed.
Proceed.
You know, I love the specific weight of that word. It doesn't say succeed. It doesn't say conquer. It just says proceed.
The distinction is vital.
Because when you are in the dust, the idea of success feels a million miles away.
Yeah.
If you just got fired, the command to go out and crush it or achieve greatness feels like a cruel joke.
It feels impossible.
Right. If the text said, therefore succeed, we would all just give up. The gap between the dirt and the mountaintop is too wide. Exactly. Proceed simply means taking the very next step. It is the commitment to momentum over outcome. Any forward motion breaks the paralysis of the fall.
Just keep moving.
Just keep moving. But you cannot just wander aimlessly. Random motion isn't progress. It's just thrashing.
Right. You could just be pacing your living room.
How do you know where to proceed? The text gives us the ultimate compass in the final fragment. His D. His duty.
Okay, I have to stop you right here. Duty.
I knew you were going to stop me.
That word carries so much heavy, oppressive baggage for a modern listener.
It really does.
In Western culture today, duty sounds like an archaic obligation to a system that doesn't care about you. It sounds like giving up your freedom. We prefer words like passion, purpose, or, calling.
We want a cinematic destiny.
Yes, we want our lives to be driven by grand, exciting, cinematic destinies. Duty sounds like doing the dishes.
It does sound like doing the dishes.
Yeah.
And that is precisely its power. We have to remember the context of the Panchatantra. In ancient Indian philosophy, this D word is almost certainly pointing toward dharma.
Okay, let's dig into dharma, because if I'm going to base my recovery on it, I need to know how it's different from just blindly following orders.
Dharma is a vast, complex concept, obviously. But in the realm of daily practical life, it translates to something like the right way of living, or the inherent responsibility you hold in any given moment based on your specific context and role.
So it's contextual.
Highly situational. It is not a grand, lifelong, inflexible destiny. If you are a student sitting in a classroom, your dharma in that hour is to study.
Right.
If you are a parent holding a crying child, your dharma is to soothe that child. If you are an employee, your dharma is to execute the task in front of you with integrity.
Okay, so how does that help me when my life has just fallen apart?
Think about the psychological state of someone who has just experienced a massive failure. Their world is shattered. If you tell that person, hey, go find your life's passion,
That's way too much pressure.
you are crushing them under the weight of an impossible macro decision. They're already experiencing extreme cognitive overload.
Right, they can't even process the failure, let alone their life's calling.
Exactly. Dharma removes the choice paralysis. It radically narrows the field of variables. When you don't know what the grand purpose of your life is anymore, you don't need to figure it out. You just look at the reality of your immediate environment and you do your duty for the next 5 minutes.
Let's map this onto a real person to make it super concrete. Let's go back to our hypothetical business owner whose company just went bankrupt.
Okay?
They have gone through the process. They stopped playing the victim. They reframed the narrative with words, I. They looked at the stars to regulate their nervous system.
You did all the internal work.
Right. Now, Monday morning arrives. The alarm goes off. The gravity of the depression and the shame hits them before they even open their eyes. What does it actually mean to proceed with duty in that specific moment?
It means they do not lie in bed asking, how do I rebuild $1 million company?
Because that's too big.
Or, how do I restore my reputation in the industry? Those questions are too big. They will cause the brain to shut down and pull the covers back over its head.
So what do they ask instead?
Instead, the practice is to ask a hyper-localized reflection question. What is the very next right step? What is my immediate duty in this literal moment?
And the answer is incredibly mundane, isn't it? My duty right now is to literally put my feet on the floor.
Yes. My duty is to get out of bed. My duty is to take a shower. My duty is to make breakfast for my children because they are hungry and I'm their parent.
That's the parent dharma right there.
Exactly. My duty is to open my laptop and reply to the first email. That is it. You find the smallest, most undeniable unit of responsibility in your immediate radius, and you execute it.
You proceed.
You proceed. And here's the neurological secret behind this ancient wisdom. Action is the antidote to despair. By fulfilling that tiny mundane duty, you give your brain a microdose of dopamine.
Oh, because you completed a task.
Right. You reestablish a baseline of competence.
Yeah.
You prove to your own nervous system that you still have agency in the world. You rebuild your foundation in the dust, one microscopic step at a time.
So you do not think your way out of degradation.
No. You act your way out of it through your dharma.
That is unbelievably liberating. It takes the massive, crushing weight of an existential crisis and scales it down into a sequence of manageable increments. You know?
This makes survival possible.
You don't have to fix the whole feeling of being degraded all at once. You don't have to force yourself to suddenly be happy or successful or passionate. You just have to find your your immediate duty, and proceed.
It is a profound, complete sequence. Just think about the journey we just mapped.
Yeah.
From the biological shock of the fall, to the insidious snare of the ego, to the architectural reclamation of the voice, to the regulating perspective of the cosmos, to the quiet, undeniable dignity of taking the next right step.
It is an entire philosophy of human resilience embedded in just 11 partial words clinging to the edge of a forgotten page.
It's honestly mind-blowing when you step back and look at it.
It really makes you reconsider how we judge history and how we judge our own lives, which actually brings me to a final provocative thought I want to leave you, the listener, with today. Something to just mull over as you navigate whatever challenges your week holds.
What's the thought?
Well, we spent this entire deep dive analyzing broken fragments of a lost page. We mourned the fact that we don't have the complete manuscript. But perhaps the shattered condition of the text is actually the ultimate hidden lesson itself.
How do you mean?
Life rarely gives us complete, pristine sentences. It rarely gives us perfect narratives with clear beginnings, smooth middles, and neatly resolved happily ever after endings. We don't get a flawless manuscript.
Yeah, we really...
But life gives us fragments. We get a chaotic mix of unexpected degradations, a mouthful of dust, and occasional breathtaking glimpses of the stars. It is our responsibility, our ultimate overarching dharma, to take these broken, jagged pieces of our experiences, string them together with our own narrative, our words, I, and simply proceed.
We cannot wait for the universe to hand us a complete story. We are the ones who must create the meaning from the fragments.
Exactly. The gaps between the words, the silence on the torn edge of the page. That is where we are forced to actually do the living.
Well said.
That's the heart of this section. This is wisdom for the present, where understanding leads to clarity, and clarity shapes how we see and live. We'll see you in the next episode.